Hi, this is Juliet Orfiano. Welcome to my video. If you are first time on my channel, please like, share, and subscribe so I can notify you when I have a new video. This is the continuation of part 2 about the operations, dividends, book value per share, and earnings per share. I discussed in part 2 about dividends. Just click above or the link below this video to watch part 2. The topic that I am going to discuss in this video is about dividends on preference shares. Dividends on preference share. When dividends are paid, the dividends requirements on preference shares must be paid before any payment can be made to ordinary shareholders. The required dividends depend upon the type of preference shares issued by the corporation. The preference shares may be first, cumulative, when preference shares are entitled to the payment of past years' unpaid dividends in arrears before the payment of current year dividends. Second, non-cumulative, when preference shares are not entitled to payment of dividends in arrears but to current year's dividends only. Third, participating, when preference shares are entitled to additional dividends after the payment of regular dividends to both the preference and ordinary shareholders. If the preference shares are fully participating, then the excess dividends is allocated proportionately to the two classes of shares capital based on their total par value. However, if the preference shares are participating up to a certain percentage only, a comparison should be made between the maximum allowed participation and the amount based on full participation. The amount given to the preference shareholders is the lower of the two amounts. Number 4. Non-participating. When preference shares are not entitled to any dividend in excess of the regular rate, hence, the dividends on preference shares is limited only to the regular rate even if the amount of dividends distribution increases. The entire dividend balance after the preference shareholders get the regular dividend rate is given to the ordinary shareholders. Illustrative problem F. The Fortune Corporation declared and paid cash dividends for the last 3 years as follows: 2006 for 120,000 pesos, 2007 200,000 pesos, 2008 for 300,000 pesos. No dividends were paid for 2 years prior to 2006. The capital structure of the company for the last 3 years is as follows: 10% preference share capital at 100 pesos par, 5,000 shares outstanding, 500,000 ordinary share capital at 50 pesos par, 5,000 shares outstanding for 250,000 pesos. The annual dividend requirement on preference shares is 50,000 or 10 pesos per share, like 100 pesos par times 10% times 5,000 shares outstanding. At the beginning of 2006, dividends are in arrears, unpaid dividends of prior years for 2 years. The distribution of dividends to the preference and ordinary shareholders under different independent cases are presented as follows. Case number 1. The preference shares are non-cumulative. Preference shares 2006 for 50,000 pesos, 2007 for 50,000 pesos, 2008 for 50,000 pesos. Ordinary shares balance 2006 70,000 pesos, 2007 150,000 pesos, 2008 250,000 pesos. Total dividends 2006 is 120,000 pesos, 2007 200,000 pesos, 2008 300,000 pesos. Dividends per share, preference shares. 2006 is 10 pesos. 2007, 10 pesos. 2008 is 10 pesos. Ordinary shares, 2006 is 14 pesos. 2007 is 30 pesos. 2008 is 50 pesos. Note, since the preference shares are non-cumulative, the dividends in arrears are ignored, and preference shareholders are entitled to the current year's dividend only. Since the shares are also non-participating, the entire balance is given to ordinary shareholders. Preference shares are not entitled to any dividend in excess of the 10% rate. Hence, the dividend per share on preference share is limited to 10 pesos only, even if the total amount of distributed dividends increases. Case number 2, the preference shares are cumulative but not participating. 2006, dividends in arrears, 50,000 pesos times 2. Preference, 100,000 pesos. Ordinary, none. Total, 100,000 pesos. Current dividends required, 50,000 pesos. Available, 20,000 pesos. Preference, 20,000 pesos. Total, 20,000 pesos. In arrears, end of 2006, 30,000 pesos. Total dividends preference, 120,000 pesos. Total, 120,000 pesos. Dividends per share, 24 pesos. 2007, dividends in arrears. Preference is 30,000 pesos. Total is 30,000 pesos. Current dividends preference, 50,000 pesos. Total, 50,000 pesos. Balance to ordinary shareholders, ordinary 120,000 pesos, total 120,000 pesos. Total dividends preference 80,000 pesos, ordinary 120,000 pesos. Total is 200,000 pesos. Dividends per share, preference 16 pesos, ordinary 24 pesos. 2008, current dividend preference 50,000 pesos. Total, 50,000 pesos. Balance to ordinary shareholders, ordinary 250,000 pesos, total 250,000 pesos. Total preference 50,000 pesos, ordinary 250,000 pesos, total 300,000 pesos. Dividends per share, preference 10 pesos, ordinary 50 pesos. Note, since the preference shares are cumulative, they are entitled to the payment of dividends in arrears. However, since they are non-participating, they are not entitled to any dividends in excess of the current year's dividends. Case number 3, the preference shares are non-cumulative but fully participating. 2006 regular dividends preference 50,000 pesos, ordinary 50 times 10% times 5,000 shares is equals to 25,000 pesos. Total is 75,000 pesos, balance 45,000 pesos. Preference 500 divided by 750 times 45,000 pesos is equals to 30,000 pesos. Ordinary 250 divided by 750 times 45,000 is equals to 15,000 pesos. Total of 45,000. Total dividends preference 80,000 pesos. Ordinary 40,000 pesos. Total of 120,000 pesos. Dividends per share preference 16 pesos. Ordinary 8 pesos. 2007 regular dividends preference 50,000 pesos. Ordinary 50 times 10% times 5,000 shares is 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance to 125,000 pesos. Preference, 500 divided by 750 times 125,000 pesos is equals to 83,333. Ordinary, 250 divided by 750 times 125,000 pesos is equals to 41,667 pesos. Total is 125,000 pesos. Total dividends preference, 133,333. Ordinary, 66,667. Total of 200,000. Dividends per share preference, 26.67 pesos. Ordinary, 13.33 pesos. 2008 regular dividends preference, 50,000 pesos. Ordinary, 50 times 10% times 5,000 shares is equals to 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance, 225,000 pesos. Preference, 500 divided by 750 times 225,000 pesos is equals to 150,000 pesos. Ordinary, 250 divided by 750 times 225,000 pesos is equals to 75,000 pesos. Total of 225,000 pesos. Total dividends. Preference, 200,000 pesos. Ordinary, 100,000 pesos. Total of 300,000 pesos. Dividends per share. Preference, 40 pesos. Ordinary, 20 pesos. Note, since the preference shares are non-cumulative, they are entitled to current year's dividends only. And since they are fully participating, they are entitled to additional dividends after payment of regular dividends to both preference and ordinary shareholders. The regular dividend on ordinary shares is based on the dividend rate on preference shares. The excess dividend is allocated proportionately to the two classes of capital shares based on their total par value. Case number 4. The preference shares are cumulative and fully participating. 2006, dividends in arrears, 50,000 pesos times 2 preference is equals to 100,000 pesos. Total of 100,000 pesos. Current dividends required, 50,000 pesos. Available, 20,000 pesos. Preference, 20,000 pesos. Total, 20,000 pesos. In arrears, end of 2006 is 30,000 pesos. Total dividends preference, 120,000 pesos. Total of 120,000 pesos. Dividends per share, 24 pesos. 2007. Dividends in arrears, preference, 30,000 pesos. Total, 30,000 pesos. Current or regular dividends, preference, 50,000 pesos. Ordinary, 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance, 95,000 pesos. Preference, 500 divided by 750 times 95,000 pesos is equals to 63,333 pesos. Ordinary, 250 divided by 750 times 95,000 pesos is equals to 31,667 pesos. Total of 95,000 pesos. Total dividends preference, 143,333. Ordinary, 56,667 pesos. Total of 200,000 pesos. Dividends per share, preference, 28.67 pesos. Ordinary, 11.33 pesos. 2008, current or regular dividends, preference, 50,000 pesos. Ordinary, 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance, 225,000 pesos. Preference, 500 divided by 750 times 225,000 pesos is equals to 150,000 pesos. Ordinary, 250 divided by 750 times 225,000 pesos is equals to to 75,000 pesos. Total of 225,000 pesos. Total dividends preference 200,000 pesos. Ordinary 100,000 pesos. Total 300,000 pesos. Dividends per share preference 40 pesos. Ordinary 20 pesos. Note: since the preference shares are both cumulative and fully participating, they are entitled to the receipt of dividends in arrears and also to the receipt of additional dividends after payment of regular dividends to both preference and ordinary shareholder. Case number 5. The preference shares are non-cumulative but participating up to additional 18%. This means that the maximum participation of preference shares on the excess dividends is 40,000 pesos or 8% of 500,000 pesos. 2006 regular dividends preference 50,000 pesos. Ordinary 50 pesos times 10% times 5,000 shares is equals to 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance 45,000 pesos. Preference 500 divided by 750 times 45,000 pesos is equals to 30,000 pesos. Ordinary 250 divided by 750 times 45,000 pesos is equals to 15,000 pesos. Total of 45,000 pesos. Total dividends preference 80,000 pesos. Ordinary 40,000 pesos. Total of 120,000 pesos. Dividends per share preference 16 pesos. Ordinary is 8 pesos. 2007 regular dividends preference 50,000 pesos. Ordinary 50,000 pesos times 10% times 5,000 shares is equals to 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance 125,000 pesos. Preference 500 divided by 750 times 125,000 pesos is equals to 83,333 pesos. Preference 40,000 pesos. Ordinary 125,000 pesos less 40,000 pesos is equals to 85,000 pesos. Total is 125,000 pesos. Total dividends preference 90,000 pesos. Ordinary 110,000 pesos. Total of 200,000 pesos. Dividends per share preference 18 pesos. Ordinary 22 pesos. 2008 regular dividends preference 50,000 pesos. Ordinary 50 times 10% times 5,000 shares is equals to 25,000 pesos. Total of 75,000 pesos. Balance 225,000 pesos. Preference 500 divided by 750 times 225,000 pesos is equals to 150,000 pesos. Preference is equals to 40,000 pesos. Ordinary 225,000 pesos less 40,000 pesos is equals to 185,000 pesos. Total is 225,000 pesos. Total dividends preference 90,000 pesos. Ordinary 210,000 pesos. Total is 300,000 pesos. Dividends per share preference 18 pesos. Ordinary 42 pesos. 40,000 pesos is the lower amount. Note: since the preference share are participating up to a certain percentage only, a comparison should be made between the maximum allowed participation and the amount based on full participation. The amount to be given to the preference shareholder is the lower of the two amounts. Alternatively, the amount to be allocated to the preference shares is computed by multiplying the total par value of the preference shares by the lower of the full participating rate or the maximum participation rate. The full participation rate is computed as follows. Full participation is equals to excess dividends to be distributed divided by the total par value of preference and ordinary shares. Using the data, in case 5, the full participation rate of 2006, 2007, and 2008 are as follows. 2006, 45,000 divided by 750,000 is 6%. 2007, 125,000 divided by 750,000 is 16.67%. 2008, 225,000 divided by 750,000 is equals to 30%. Hence, in 2006, the 6% rate will be used in 2007, and 2008 the 7% rate will be used. Thank you for watching my video. I hope nagustuhan mo at may natutunan ka sa video ito. Meron akong ginawang part 4 at continuation nito kung saan diniscuss ko doon ang tungkol sa book value per share. I-click mo lang sa taas o sa link sa baba ng video ito para mapanood mo yung part 4. Don't forget to like, share o mag-subscribe ka sa channel ko para ma-notify kita sa tuwing may bago akong video. Once again, this is Juliet, Orfiano. See you on my next video.